we looked at Firmicutes to bacterial size ratios, specifically for the chemical treated birds and then the yeast product birds. And the ratio was lowered for that yeast product bird. And we also they also established that there were certain biomarkers, again, that were associated with improved performance. And so allostypes is one that specifically is associated with improved performance. And so you saw more mapping about with the samples that were taken from that yeast product, those yeast product birds, you found the mapping to be a greater association with some of these principal biomarkers that are associated with improved performance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Poultry Podcast. My name is Jason Emmert, and I'll be your host today as we visit with Dr. Kelley Wamsley, who is an associate professor in the Poultry Science Department at Mississippi State University. Welcome, Dr. Wamsley. It's great to have you back on the podcast.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation. And on your first podcast with the group, I think you took us through your academic journey, kind of how you got to where you are. But I have kind of a twist on that I thought we might explore for just a second. And that is just to ask, what led you to academia? So what is it that made you want to pursue an academic type of career?
Sure. Not the money. No, it's I think it's the fact I feel like I had a lot of really great teachers in my life, and I just felt like it was kind of a way that I could give back, and I saw myself eventually at least going into academia. And first kind of going out there and trying to test the job waters. I was, looked at some industry opportunities, and then felt like, really overall the best fit for me would be going into academia right away, which is, it's a little challenging whenever you're first coming from a PhD program and then just jumping into academia. And I didn't do a postdoc or anything like that. And so there were some learning curves, but there are with anything, right?
Absolutely, that's right.
And I liked the opportunity that I could teach, some different classes, have the involvement with students, and then be able to do a lot of different research and still have that impact on the industry.
Natural Biologics is using cutting-edge science to dig deeper into the poultry health challenges you face. By gathering scientific evidence, they identify the most effective combinations of natural ingredients that improve animal health. Visit naturalbiologics.com/poultry to see the newest research in both turkeys and chickens.
Absolutely. And I think you have a lot of control over the direction that your career goes. And it allows you a little bit of freedom to pursue things, and also some time to develop a research program and decide which direction you want to go. And but yeah, for me, the teaching part that's what drew me the most. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's also, whenever you have, it's the people too, right? I mean, there's different feelings on different things, and it's just the people that are around you. And then, whenever you have that, the support through, a good fit on the industry, from the industry, supporting the university or the department too, and then having those relationships, but then also throughout, the other faculty that are there, and just administration with the university, there's all kind of timing on that kind of fit too that goes into play. And so I've been really thankful that I've had a really great group around me too.
Yeah, That's wonderful. And I think looking at your publication record, you've done some collaborative work with folks at other universities. And that too, I feel like is a really exciting thing that we're seeing more and more. Everybody relying on their strengths. We don't all have the same resources, but we can all bring something to the table.
Right. And that was one thing that was kind of interesting to me because I came from an animal science department like you're in, and didn't really have that much familiarity with just a poultry science group itself. And so that's also a very different dynamic. And I worked with Joe Moritz. He was my boss, Dr. Moritz, at West Virginia. And so he was everything poultry, right? And extension and everything. It was a great opportunity for me because I was able to get my hands involved in a lot of different things. But it was also really, amazing whenever I came here to the poultry science department at State and then there's, reproduction. Oh yeah. Let me just go down the hall and then talk to the reproductive physiologist, that's an expert in poultry, And so that's fun in itself also for me. But both sides of animal science and then also poultry science have their advantages for sure.
They do. And I think the greatest advantage we have is that we have each other to reach out to and collaborate and connect, and that makes it exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go to meetings and then it really is like you're just catching up with old friends from all over. And so I think that's what's so neat about our industry in itself, that a lot of people outside wouldn't get.
That's right. They think it's about the chickens, and it's not. It's about the people. The chickens, the turkeys, the poultry, it's important, but the people, that's the core.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I think I'd like to explore a little bit of some recent work that you've been involved in. I think looking at some yeast products and early broiler performance, getting into the coccidiosis area as well. And so, if you want to get us started and kind of fill us in on some of that.
Sure. So I'm no disease expert by any means, but I think that one thing that I really like within my lab, and we work a lot with industry, and then also trying to do really relevant research. And so, of course, coccidiosis is a major problem in the industry, and it's not going away. And traditionally we've had chemical treatments and ionophores to be able to control that. There's, now live coccidiosis vaccines that are being utilized very often in the industry. And those certainly are all great tools to have in a toolbox. And just depending on your production, you're going to utilize one or multiple of those, right?
Sure.
And then, there's a lot of it's kind of overwhelming, a lot of different products out there and a lot of yeast products too. And we work a lot with different companies and trying to kind of assess the best application that there could be for some of these products. And so, recently I had two students, an undergrad and a graduate student, that presented two projects with some yeast type products that are there in that coccidiosis, trying to kind of help with that response and early performance that could be to see how these products might be able to mitigate the coccidiosis. And so we partnered with Natural Biologics, and they have two different products that we worked with. So their Provilli Max product, that is a concentrated yeast cell wall components type product that's combined with a Bacillus subtilis. And then we also worked with Provillis, which has a yeast probiotic and yeast fermentation extracts and a probiotic and some other components, mixed in with it. And so we wanted to test their efficacy and compare them to a traditional, type program with a coccidiostat also. And so we used commercial broilers, Ross 708 birds, and to try to induce. There's a lot of different ways to try to induce that coccidiosis to come into about. And, we don't have, our facilities right now, we don't have that type of facility that's always had coccidiosis in it. We do utilize built up litter. We have 2 commercial houses that are adjacent to our poultry farm. And so we're contract growers for a company. And so a lot of times it gives us some flexibility so that we can kind of bring that litter into our own facilities and give that kind of real world exposure to the birds that we're using on trial, which are going to be in a commercial type house, but of course, with pens, similar to a lot of, some other setups at other universities. But we don't, challenge with Ameria. We just use a live coccidiosis vaccine, and we look at dosing the birds with a, increased dose. So we looked at a 10x dose at day 14, and then did oocyst counts and fecal collections from 5 to 9 days when we were testing both of these different products. And we looked at eggs per gram, and then we looked at performance, of course, of the birds, and did some lesion scoring. We found that we were really effective in being able to challenge the birds. We saw that in the treatments where we had challenged them with that 10x dose, that they had more oocysts per gram in the litter. So that was good, right? So many times when you're doing research, it's like you try to control for everything that you can, and sometimes it just doesn't, and that's why it's called research, right?
That's right. That is right.
But so it was interesting, because we had weights of birds from day 14 and day 21. We saw some differences in lesion scores, but there wasn't that really dramatic coccidiosis challenge that occurred. But that's also in part by design, right? I mean, you don't want to really, it wasn't the goal of a study of just really knock down those birds, but just have some kind of realistic subclinical type challenge for the birds. So it's really practical. And so we found that performance was improved, similar to the chemical treatment of coccidiosis for both of those, for both of the products that we tested. And then we also found, which was interesting. So one thing that we found was that performance was improved, at least similar to that of the coccidiosis that we tested it against.
Sure.
And we also found that our positive control, which was our non-challenge treatment, had the lowest oocyst counts. So like I said, good on us. We didn't have any cross-contamination there. Our negative control, so our groups of birds that were challenged, that had no kind of coccidiosis control, those had higher oocyst counts. So that's good.
Yeah.
And our chemical treatment had the lowest, similar to that of birds that were not treated or did not receive that did not receive our challenge. So, the chemical coccidiosis is doing what it's supposed to do, reducing oocysts in the litter, right? Oocyst shedding. And then we find that with our yeast products, there was still an increase in the oocyst counts from the fecal collections. And that's not really, when you think at first, you're like, wait a second, you don't want it to see increased, right? Mm-hmm. But, whenever you start thinking about how products work, right, its mode of action isn't similar to a chemical. It's not supposed to just completely mitigate the the Amelia species.
Right.
And so you're modulating the immune system, right? You're changing things that are going on in the you're altering, the gut microbiome. You're looking at you're changing the morphology of the intestines and the immune function, and so then you're going to have other impacts to be able to control and mitigate those negative effects of coccidiosis. And so that was interesting, and just kind of of finding that. And we also, with one of the products, with the Provilus product, we actually did some microbiome testing also at day 21. And so when we did that, so another thing that we added in with the Provilus treatment was that we did some swabbing to look at the microbiome, because like I said, we're looking to see what's happening within the bird and what's causing what's helping to improve the performance for birds that were given this subclinical coccidiosis infection. And so we swabbed the birds did cloacal swabs on day 21. And the Natural Biologics partnered, they have a partnership with Alaris Animal Nutrition. And so they process those samples and use this AI platform to correlate and identify these bacterial clusters and looking at how they may correlate to performance. And so they have different data. They have a database, Alaris does, that has samples from other animals, so broilers and turkeys and swine. And so they're looking for some of these commonalities about where those clusters may also overlap with improved performance. And so what we found was that we had some positive biomarkers more associated in especially the chemical treatment, but then also in our Provilus treatment birds. And so we had more positive biomarkers in the yeast product treated birds than the chemical. And there were also several genera that were associated with improved performance overall. And they have this, we looked at Firmicutes to bacterial size ratios, specifically for the chemical treated birds and then the yeast product birds. And the ratio was lowered for that yeast product bird. And we also they also established that there were certain biomarkers, again, that were associated with improved performance. And so allostypes is one that specifically is associated with improved performance. And so you saw more mapping with the samples that were taken from that yeast product, those yeast product birds. You found the mapping to be a greater association with some of these principal biomarkers that are associated with improved performance. And so, again, it gives a snapshot in time, and this is a microbiome. It's not my area. I'm feeding birds, but it's a neat experience to be able, that's where we're going to. And, everyone's going into that world. And so it was good for us to get this first step into doing this type of research and the experience for the students. And then also kind of be on the front end of helping to add to the data set. Because, of course, you have to have good data to be able to, and robust, right, to be able to make some of these clear connections with performance and these biomarkers. And so you're only as good as the data that you have, and having and being able to provide this information. So that was really unique for us, and a great study. And so we really enjoyed being able to do this work. And it's in the starter phase, right?
Yeah, sure.
So we're still in the beginning, and we're looking to follow up and look at carryover performance, and then adding in other details on what happens with late cycling of coccidiosis, potentially that's kind of associated with live coccidiosis vaccines. So how can these products, potentially mitigate those negative effects there? And then also, compensatory growth that may occur later on, and looking at, processing parameters, and then just the economics behind it all. And so we're really excited to be able to also kind of follow up the work and continue this on and look at, other correlations that we may be able to find with performance and some of these biomarkers also at later ages.
Yeah, great. It is a great start to that. And this is one of those areas, I think, that if you try to think of all the problems at once, every age and every situation, and it gets overwhelming. But, as scientists, you have to stop and say, okay, what kind of plan can we implement to take on these things one step at a time? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we often get, and I know I'm definitely guilty of this, is we get so excited about one thing and then we're just trying to add in. And you definitely want to get as much mileage as possible out of a study. But sometimes just keeping it simple and kind of narrowing down your treatments, and then, looking at, locking in on certain phases, and then using the information that you gain from that to then apply to the next study. And then I think sometimes it's a lot better idea to do that. Just slowing things down and just keeping things simple.
Absolutely. And you've developed some good expertise in starter phase and finisher phase. You've done work in lots of different ages. And so you've got a great background to be able to tackle that at different stages of the process. That really helps.
Yeah, that's one thing, the starter phase is so important, for all of our birds. With the developments of, genetics, and the bird is growing faster and faster, that starter phase represents, that such more and more, I think, of a key time to be able to capitalize on, getting that bird off to a good start, laying that foundation, getting that microbiome established, the intestine morphology established, so that you can really maximize the potential of the bird in the immune system and everything, right? And so if you get that bird off to a good start, you should be able to, hopefully then the bird comes up to other challenges in the environment or management or whatever. And so, or nutritional challenges that may occur. But then hopefully you're able to, the bird's able to overcome that, and you'll be able to maximize your return. So, yeah.
It's easy to see what happens to a house when it doesn't have a good foundation. And to me, birds are the same way. Yeah, get a good foundation at the beginning, and then you're ready to tackle other things later. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great analogy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier AI, and I'll just be clear, we're not talking about avian influenza, but the artificial intelligence. And I'm hard pressed to think of an area, but there probably is one, but to think of an area where that could be more applicable than the microbiome, because you're just dealing with such large numbers and variety of species. And AI, to me, can be so helpful in that. That's a great use of that technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is really funny because my husband is in IT. And so he talks about AI all the time, but he's been talking about it for a really long time. And, depending on what area you're in, it's either artificial insemination, artificial intelligence, or avian influenza, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But it is nice that now we have popping up AI in our conversation in the poultry realm, and we're not just talking about avian influenza, right?
And I think it is going to be helpful as we consider all the variables, starter phase and finisher phase. And do you overfeed? Do you underfeed? Do you sacrifice this now to gain that later? It's so complex. AI is bound to be helpful.
Absolutely. I think that's where we're going. Absolutely, in a lot of different areas in the poultry world or in animal ag, and I think that's we have to embrace that technology because it is the future, and building those databases, like I said earlier, you're only as good as the data that you have, and so being able to control for all these various factors, or being able to account for how the experimental conditions are, and being able to plug in all those numbers, and then being able to find that association that may exist there between so many varieties of studies. I think it's really exciting. It's daunting, right?
Yes.
But it's really exciting, and I think that's also why it's so important that when we're conducting research, that we're really looking at what we can control for, and also just documenting everything as much as possible. And just because you don't find, a difference in a study doesn't mean that it's a bad or failed study.
Oh, for sure. Yep, absolutely.
And that's, and I'm sure that this too, Jason, with students and running research. And then, when you get to something and maybe you don't find as big a results, that's kind of where, the students kind of get disappointed. And they're like, what did I do wrong? It's, you didn't do anything wrong. Let's look at this. We need to really look at what this could be, because there could be other factors that are, that we didn't think about, or that we couldn't control for, that then came in and impacted our data. And so that's why it's just so important to be able to kind of document every single little thing that you do.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And we use that term negative results. And, I think in a lot of our minds, it just means we didn't see differences. But for a student especially, they can take that word negative and twist it a little bit and think it's bad. And yeah, not always, maybe even not usually the case is it bad, but it's still adding to our knowledge base. So very important.
Right. Mm-hmm. And some of those things that you can learn from going back and looking at that can be more meaningful than a trial that's just 100% slam dunk on being able to see things exactly what you want to see. It's like, you could take in, for instance, some of the OSIS counts. I know that whenever one of my students was looking at that data, and they saw that with the yeast product, the fecal OSIS counts went up compared to the chemical control. And then they're thinking, oh my goodness, did I mess up? Did we have it's not the mode of action of that product. And so you have to think about it from all sides. And just because some number goes up doesn't mean that it's always bad.
Right. That absolutely. Yeah. Different things work differently. And the bird knows how to sort that out better than we know how to analyze the results sometimes.
That's right. Yeah. And sometimes the birds just don't read the protocol, but.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. They're bad about that. We gotta help them.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe AI can help us with that too.
That's right. I did want to ask you, because you've done a lot of great work with particle size, and that's really interesting. Do you foresee any crossover with these areas, that potentially there could be particle size advantages or disadvantages when we're using this product or that product? Is that something that you think might be in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. In some of our early work, we looked at, we had a unintentional coccidiosis challenge that occurred whenever we were doing some feed particle size work. And so, and talking about more of the physical feed form rather than of the external size of the feed, right, rather than the internal particle size of the feed, but the size of the complete feed.
Right.
And, we saw some interesting results there. But of course, when you're just looking at internal or just the ingredient particle size, there's a lot of data out there that kind of supports that, increasing that particle size, that you get increased gizzard function and hydrochloric acid secretion, and that can be associated with improved gut health down the line. And so I think that it is really complicated just thinking about how you're taking all of these different ingredients of various sizes and other physical characteristics, and then in the pelleting process, you're combining them together, right, and creating a pellet, and so a larger physical feed form. And then the pelleting process itself impacts some of those internal particle sizes.
Yeah.
And we just did, actually, I was Dr. Birger Spihus. I just did 2 recordings with him for the Poultry Black Belt Nutrition podcast. A shameless plug there, right?
Right.
But that's just, and we kind of got into some of this discussion because it's so interesting. But I completely can see us moving in that direction of thinking about all of the particle sizes, internal and external, and then being able to also look at, if you combine some of these products into the feed, also, if that can help, again, cause another layer or add another layer of potential protection to the birds. And so, I think as we're moving forward, we're going to be, I think it's only smart of us to look at all of these different factors. And even in looking at enzymes, there's been a lot of work that's been done on the enzymes that you wouldn't necessarily maybe at first glance think about the impact that they could have on gut health and potential, disease mitigation.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating to me. And even sometimes you think about, okay, there's large particles and maybe the birds are pulling those out and they're playing with it. But then you might look and say, well, yeah, the feeders are too low. They're playing in the feed too much. So there's even the really management kinds of variables that step in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so you can, the birds are going to do whatever they're going to do. Right. And then,
That's right.
And, we're just trying to help them along the way. But definitely management can be a challenge. And I think that's, one thing that I really emphasize, especially with my students on when they're running research trials, is that, understanding the birds. I know that we had Tom Tabler, that was an extension specialist, in our department, and he's still an extension specialist, of course. And he would tell the students, get that 5-gallon bucket, turn it upside down, sit in the house, and just listen to the birds. And they'll tell you a lot from just listening. You can hear them hitting on the drinkers, and you can hear them, eating the, feed, and you can hear, potential disease that's coming through that flock too. And so if you can understand and just have that handle on the management of the birds and the typical things that the birds are going to be doing, and you can kind of, again, it's helping control for some of those things that can pop up in an experiment that aren't, maybe related to nutrition or feed, but it's the management things that you need to be looking for. Do I need to change my ventilation, and how do I tweak it? Or, it's one thing to read a protocol and say, hey, we need to stick with these birds are supposed to be brooded at 92 degrees, right? So if we set the thermostat at 92 degrees or 90 degrees, then they're going to be fine. It's not always the case.
Nope. Yeah, the things that you can see, hear, and even smell. Yep,
absolutely.
Very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't take a book for that,
No.
It's just paying attention to surroundings and watching the birds and seeing what they need to do. Because if a student comes out of my lab and doesn't know, what a bird should look like in the brooding phase, and what a bird in heat stress looks like, especially in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And I haven't done my job at all.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what AI allows us to do in terms of what we see, hear, and smell. Because certainly you can detect all of those things using AI. So I think we're just in the early stages of thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know, people are, doing work and putting in, microphones and chicken houses and, and already cameras, of course, but being able to kind of link so many of these different factors that we're measuring. And that's where you mentioned too, Jason, on, collaborating with others. I'm not an expert in, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert in some of these areas. And so then if you can collaborate with some of these others and, in computer science and look and then really maximize the potential of your data and your impact on the industry overall. And ultimately the consumer.
Right, that's right. Which we have to keep in mind. Yeah, that's very, very important. Yeah. Last kind of scientific thing I wanted to ask before we get to a little twist on the three questions, because you've answered those before, but your mindset with regard to the starter period. And I just sit here and wonder, should we consider rethinking what the starter period is, because it is encompassing a greater percentage of the overall grow out? Or are there just physiological things happening in that time frame that we need to kind of keep thinking of the starter period in the same length of time that we have been?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that there's been research where people are looking at, getting things started in the hatchery, right? And putting, some type of nutrient there in the hatcher, and so we're in, obviously we're already doing it in transportation whenever birds or chicks are transferred for a long period of time. But, then there's some, focus that's been on pre-starter diets, and then there's focus that's been done on, extending the starter phase even a little bit longer to try to help, keep a consistent feed in front of the birds, so that because at that time frame, maybe, early on in the first 2 weeks, that the birds are going to have that disease challenge and cocci is going to hit. And so maybe if we extend that starter feed out into 18 days, then we can make it past that, and the bird doesn't have another challenge that could happen, because, the feed changes, and then, obviously then that's going to have an impact on the microbiome and, everything that's going on in the bird. And so if they don't have that extra stress, when I guess also, a feed form change from going from either a crumbled feed to a pellet, or, just depending on the feed quality that's there. And so, that would be a really, I don't know that the research has been done to kind of compare something like that, but that's a really good thought, on how, I think we need to be thinking about it. Starter feed form has been especially a big focus in our lab. And I think the starter phase is absolutely really important. It's always going to come down to cost, of course, right? And return on investment. So we have to be cognizant about that. But yeah, maybe we need to be looking at that phase, starter phase, a little bit closer, and then thinking about, okay, well, what if we, do a pre-starter diet? What does that mean? The investment, feed intake in that phase is low. So if you have a feed mill that's not completely overwhelmed, it maybe makes sense. But, and so, in that, in other areas across the, the globe, they're trying all different types of different practices like that. And so I think it's definitely something that we need to be looking into. But now you've given me a research idea too on some different things that we've been doing and kind of comparing them back and forth. And so, again, great way to have this conversation and then be able to, come up with different ideas.
You bet. Well, I think it's always going to be healthy for us to ask, is this the best way? Even if we end up in the long run sticking with that practice, always good to analyze and think about if there are other ways or other angles to view it.
Absolutely. If we get stagnant, then we're not moving forward, right? And so, yeah, you have to ask why. Just because something's always been done this way doesn't mean that it's the best. It's the best way to do it. And sometimes it is the best way, but like you said, but sometimes it's not, and it should be changed. And nobody just questioned it.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, you bring up a great point.
Yeah.
Working with nature and not against it. Chickens fed AX3 Digest consume significantly less feed and water to produce 1 pound of meat. Successful flock performance is determined during the first 10 days post-placement. AX3 Digest is a highly digestible novel protein that most improved in barn performance, bird health, and a drier litter. For more information, visit www.protecta.com. It's time for our famous 3. Your partner in improving animal performance, Berg & Schmidt. They believe the following additives are necessary in the poultry dietary. Functional lipids for an efficient dietary energy management. Phospholipids for emulsification, achieving a better nutrient intake. MCTs to provide energy and modulate the microflora within the intestines and enzymes for elevated use of fibrous materials and byproducts.
Well, as we wrap up, we have the kind of the big 3 questions, but you've answered those before. So I was going to take just the angle of any updates to that. If you think about any poultry-related resources, anything that you're finding particularly useful, kind of in the recent past here.
I would say that just getting regular updates on the literature that's coming out and new. The emails that you get from, Journal of Applied Poultry Research and Poultry Science and Animal Feed Technology, and just looking at, here are the most recent articles that are there. And just, even if they're not in your area, looking at those articles and just to also expand your knowledge. Those I'm always trying to look at. And of course, all the popular press articles that come through, just to be able to kind of know what's going on in the world of poultry and related areas, because sometimes you don't think that, some things going on across the globe are going to impact you. And that's what I encourage my students to do, especially whenever they're asking, where do I get poultry information, or how did you know that? And I'm like, you need to sign up for as much, as possible on some of these popular press, articles and resources. And just glancing through, some of those updates can be really beneficial.
Yeah, that's great.
So I guess that's kind of, one way that I kind of stay up to date on things. And just talking to the people around you too.
That's right. Yeah, there's no substitute for that, in my opinion. That's so helpful. Yeah. Well, great. Well, when we think about another book or resource, I think earlier when you were on the podcast, you talked about some podcasts and even some music you got into. So I was just going to ask, any new podcast, any new music you've kind of stumbled onto that you'd want to share?
I don't know. We processed birds yesterday in my group, and I always have a playlist. And so there's certain songs that always come on that one song came on and my student was like, I think we listen to this every processing. I'm like, yeah, it's a great song. And I think it's called Paper Planes.
Oh yeah.
And so I really like that song. It's really catchy, but that's not a new song, but yeah, I just like to keep music on. And I mean, you could come into my office and I'll have dubstep on sometimes, and it's just it's a variety of things. I want something that just kind of help. But I really, another thing I like to listen to just in general, or any of the music that's kind of the classical spin on today's hits, kind of so like Vitamin String Quartet and Piano Guys, so that you don't have the lyrics, but you have the music and the tune, and so it's easy to kind of focus and still have those. I like that kind of music, but always playing music for sure.
Me too. The silence drives me crazy. I can't take it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Good.
And books, I don't. Find Your Fierce is a book that I'm recently been finishing up, and so that was something that it's a book written by Teresa Sandy, and I had the opportunity to meet with her. And so that opportunity was provided through Novus, actually, that they had a women's type retreat. They have a group that they have, it's called The Flock. And so we meet at different poultry meetings. I wasn't at Arkansas Nutrition Conference this week, so I missed out on meeting with the ladies in that time. But it's a neat group, but they brought us together and gave us a book, Find Your Fierce. And so I've bought several copies that I've given out to some of my students too. And it talks about imposter syndrome and things like that. And it's a really great book. And she gives some exercises in it on, what to do and, finding your own group around you, and then not always looking at somebody not always getting the information from somebody who is going to just agree with you, and trying to find somebody who's going to challenge you a little bit. But you also have to think about it, where that opinion's coming from. Is it coming from a good place or a bad place? And what do you do with it?
Yep. Yep. Well, that sounds like a great one to check out. Very good. Yeah. And then the last part of it, typically the question is kind of broader advice for success. But I wanted to kind of circle back to the very beginning and just see if you have any targeted advice for students considering an academic career.
Sure. I think that anybody that wants to get into academia, I think that everything, the industry's changing, everything changes, right? The landscape of the university changes, the students change from season to season, right? And so I think it's just talking to the people around you. And if you find yourself in a position where you're a new faculty member in a department or something, get to know the students for sure, but get to know the faculty, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And even just getting to know the industry there, even if you're not, depending on your level. Just being able to have an appreciation for everything that's being done. And thinking about your story, because that's a really important thing about how you can turn the research that you do in making it into a story. And that's what the greatest, scientists do, right? And being able to give that message to anybody so that they can take it. And so that's just, seeing the people around you and, getting feedback and listening to it. And even if there's feedback that's negative or whatever, sometimes there's some really good information in there. It just, the delivery maybe wasn't the right way or whatever, but just being open to that, I think is important.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. It really is. And talking to people, recognizing all the different groups that you can interact with and still learn from. Sometimes we finish that PhD and we think, I guess now we're supposed to know everything. And no, it's just now you're supposed to want to continue learning.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're all lifelong learners, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, Kelley, thank you so much for joining us again. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your thoughts and knowledge about all the wonderful research you have going on. I think your students are lucky to have you there at Mississippi State, and we appreciate you being part of this big poultry industry, poultry world that we're all a part of. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you just asking me to join you today, and it's been a really great visit. Always great to see you.
You too. And thanks to everyone out there for listening, and we hope to catch you listening to us again. Thanks a lot.